All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Social Changemakers podcast. We are delighted and honored to have our guests today to talk about racism in hockey. This is another one of our student led podcasts. So today we've got Gracie Sacca as our lead, and we're super, super excited. So I'm just going to do sort of our opening and then I'll be handing it over to Gracie. So welcome to Gracie, our host, who is a grade 11 student in Ottawa, Ontario. She plays hockey for the Nepean Junior Wildcats and has played hockey for the last 10 years. She's a student at St. Mark's in Manotick, which is part of Ottawa, and also a part of our first group here at R.I.S.E Academy. Gracie, can you tell everyone, I made mention to it, but the issue that you want to look at and the organization that you've really wanted to focus in on?
The issue I'm currently looking at is racism, but specifically racism in hockey. Because as a hockey player, I hadn't realized that hockey wasn't diverse until it was pointed out to me. And I want to know what I can do to make the rink a more comfortable place for everybody. And I want to get a better understanding of racism in hockey in general.
Awesome. All right. Well, and we did some research. We've done some watching of videos, some podcasts, learning more about the issue, and we came across these three amazing women who are really, really doing a lot of work in this area. And like I said, we are absolutely honored to have them joining us and giving us their time. So first of all, we have Renee Hess. She teaches journalism at the University of Memphis. She works as the Assistant Director of Service Learning at La Sierra University and is the founder and executive director of the Black Girl Hockey Club. So thank you, Renee, and welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me, ladies.
Yes. So you and I, like I'm just seeing here, service learning, assistant director of service learning. So what does that look like at the university level?
So, service learning is community service connected to course learning. And my job is to connect students with community entities that take part in service that connects with the course curriculum. So, a psychology class that's talking about, the development of children, we send students in to work at preschools. And so it's mutually beneficial for the university, for the students, for the professors, and for the community. And I've been doing that for over a decade.
That's amazing. It's so amazing to hear that there's more of the experiential sort of hands-on learning that goes with the theoretical part. I know I didn't get any of that in university, and I really wish I had. Um, I'm much more of a learn by do, and I think most people
Right.
are.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So our next guest is Saroya Tinker. She's a Canadian ice hockey defenseman who just recently finished her post-secondary schooling at Yale and is currently playing for the Metropolitan. Now, we're not sure how to say this. Is it the Riveters?
Yes.
Okay, of the National, Gracie, you can tell your mom we had it right.
Yeah.
Of the National Women's Hockey League. Saroya, I was just watching your interview with Renee, and you guys were talking about your thesis paper. So I think that was in like June when you guys were having that conversation. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that paper, and is it available for people to read now?
Yeah, so I actually haven't fully published it yet just because of COVID and having to connect back with my thesis advisor. But I chose to focus my thesis on the history of Black women and how we've been objectified and over-sexualized throughout history and how that's affected our Black female athletes. So I think the main impact that I wanted to make was just letting people know that I have experienced this myself and that other people can relate to me. So I provided an autobiography part at the end of my thesis where I describe my own mental health troubles and stuff like that. So I think that I really wanted to focus my thesis on this, and it was great to just find something that I loved and related to my major. So that's why I chose to focus on that. But but yeah, it's definitely a very long paper, but it's in PDF form. So if people want it, they can send me their email.
Oh, awesome. So it is ready.
Yeah.
And another amazing story of learning that really is connected to yourself, right? And that's what learning is all about, is and that's how we really gain more knowledge than sitting and memorizing and regurgitating material. Wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Saroya.
for sure.
And last but not least, we've got Erica, and I want to make sure I say this, Ayala.
Got it.
Got it. Is a New York City based freelance sports writer. She prioritizes covering women's hockey, women's basketball, and women's soccer. So Erica, I know that you've made sort of this transition into covering, like I've looked at your YouTube channel and you've got some amazing things. We're going to dive deeper into those things. Were you working for someone else before, or is this is it? You're freelance. I don't know too much about journalism.
Sure, no problem. Well, also, I'll echo everyone else. Thank you for having me and your interest in my work. And yes, I come from a background of, I mean, almost half of, my life. So almost my entire adult life, I've worked in the nonprofit sector. So since I was in college, but I was also a student athlete in college. And recently, actually, through watching women's hockey, I got into journalism. And so that's kind of my trajectory. As you said, you can get into the nit and grit of it a little bit later. But yeah, I've made the full transition now. And so the YouTube series that you mentioned is something that I do independent, just for myself. And I curate that myself. But then I am able to place stories at different publications.
Awesome. Well, anybody who is listening to this, you've got to go and get onto that YouTube channel and see what, and we'll announce that at the end. So this is where I tap out. So I'm handing the virtual microphone over to Gracie, and we're going to get going on this interview.
Okay. Hi, guys. First off, I would like to thank you three, Saroya, Erica, and Renee, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to chat with me about this very important topic today. Okay, I'll jump right into the question. Erica, you create a video series called Social Justice in Women's Hockey Past, Present, and Future. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about that and what sort of inspired you.
Sure thing. So thank you, Gracie, for that question. And I was alluding to that I come from a nonprofit background, but I was an athlete myself, obviously been Black and a woman my whole life. So I realized when I started getting into hockey that there weren't very many BIPOC players or players of color. And so I would ask them questions. I also played a sport in college or through college that was primarily white women playing, and that's softball. And I just was curious, one, to kind of get a lay of the land and learn a little bit about how players of color were experiencing conversations that already, this is going back 5 years, but already were really starting to rise. And had always been a piece of my learning and how I see the world, especially coming from the nonprofit sector. But there was one conversation that I had with actually a former Riveters player, Mie Dench, who's now in law school. And Mie had worked on a political campaign. So of course I was picking her brain about that, and talked about how being in rural Kentucky and being and working for a Democratic candidate in rural Kentucky opened her up to having conversations about racism and some of the microaggressions that she experienced in hockey. And that it was that political experience that actually opened her up to maybe having more deeper conversations about what she was experiencing and things that she witnessed in hockey. And so I thought that was a really interesting conversation, and it led me to then ask other athletes a little bit more regularly, and not just Black or BIPOC athletes, but all hockey players, about their experiences with dealing with microaggressions or blatant racism in hockey in particular.
Yeah. And so you said that you started off with a few other sports. Like, what kind of made you want to uh, put your attention towards hockey as well?
Yeah, playing as an athlete, basically my whole life until recently. Now I'm more of a couch potato these days. But I just have also known that girls and women don't always get the attention and the respect that they deserve in sports. So I've always been gravitated towards women's sports, and that's why I almost exclusively write about women's sports now. But hockey was a sport that I didn't have a lot of access and exposure to growing up. And when I went to one of my first live hockey games, it happened to be a women's hockey game, and I truly just fell in love and have kind of followed along the trajectory of the National Women's Hockey League in particular. But I do remember going to that game, and Blake Bolden was on the ice for that game. And I was like, oh, she's got a really nice shot. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's Black. Like, that was kind of my experience. And I say that, and I say it sometimes jokingly, but again, it was just another example of ways that you can kind of enjoy an experience or a sport, but there's people that see it from different perspectives. And for me, seeing a Black player on the ice really stood out to me, and not just a Black player, but a Black woman. And that's what piqued my interest in hockey really for the first time.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. So Renee, you're the founder of the Black Girls Hockey Club. Can you tell us a bit about what that is and how you got started?
That's a good question, and I'm so excited to talk to you about it. So the Black Girl Hockey Club really started as a way to community build. As I began to get more involved in ice hockey and just become more of a fan, I realized that there really wasn't a community for Black hockey fans, specifically for Black women. And, not just hockey fans. I say hockey fans first and foremost because hockey players and hockey moms are hockey fans. So this is a place for all of us. And I started to look out on social media and reach out to people and ask the question, where are the Black girls? I discovered that there were a few of us, and we decided we wanted to get together in real life to go see a hockey game. And we ended up gathering about 45 women, their kids, their family members, and we went to go see a hockey game together. And as we were at that game, I realized that this was more than just a fan club that we could get together and go arena jump and see a bunch of hockey games. There was actually a need for, people to be able to connect, to be able to network, to be able to support one another. And so the idea for the Black Girl Hockey Club just kind of came organically out of that, a place where we could virtually spend time together. We have a very active social media account that I still run myself, even though, I'm doing a million other things. I like to hop on Twitter and, under the Black Girl Hockey Club account. And we've been, to so many different arenas and had so many wonderful game experiences. But also in the last 6 months, we've been doing virtual events where we can just spend time together, because that was the basis of what Black Girl Hockey Club is all about, was community building. And as time passed and we started seeing various needs in the community, one of the things that we wanted to do was to be able to offer scholarships to young Black girl hockey players. And so in order to do that, we had to become a nonprofit. So we decided to transition to a nonprofit organization so that we could raise money to give away money. And we actually just gave away our first scholarship this summer in August to a young hockey playing goalie named Talia Rose Tamboro. She's actually from, I want to say she's from London, Ontario. And so she is our first scholarship recipient. And then we picked 4 new scholarship recipients for fall. And we're trying to do that 3 times a year. So 4 hockey players, 3 times a year, about $10,000 each round. So we just gave away our first 10 grand. Saroya is actually on our scholarship committee. So she helped us weed through 30 applications to pick 4 young exemplary hockey playing girls from all over North America. One of our recipients is from Winnipeg. Her name is Kanari. And we have 3 others that are from various places in the US. And it's just a really exciting thing to be able to not only community build, but also support young Black hockey players and their families so that they can, not only have access to the game, but actually we're trying to keep them in the game, right? Retention is so important because once someone finds the game of hockey, they're going to fall in love with it because it's such an amazing game. But staying in the game and being able to continue playing is the challenge because it's expensive. There's a few, there's a whole bunch of ways that you can, have to turn away from hockey, whether it's financial or location or whatever that may be. And so we're trying to help overcome some of those barriers that, BIPOC kids find when they discover hockey. And scholarships are just the start, but we think it's a good start. So that's how it kind of came around. And then, of course, it kind of whirlwind out of this small little fan club into this, big organization with so many supporters and people that are looking to see us succeed. So it's been really exciting just to watch it grow and to be able to accomplish some of our goals that support our mission of just diversifying and bringing hockey to the Black masses.
That's awesome. That's actually really cool. I took a look at your Get Uncomfortable campaign, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so we just launched a campaign called the Get Uncomfortable campaign, which is a way for us to engage with hockey organizations, players, coaches, and talk about real tangible ways that allies and BIPOC folks can bring about change in hockey in regards to social issues. And so our 3 tenets of our campaign are encourage. We want our allies and folks who are on board with the Get Uncomfortable pledge to encourage young Black players. Our second tenet is to employ, and Erica loves it when I shout from the mountaintops, hire Black women. We want to encourage organizations to employ BIPOC folks at every level, from the paid internships to the C-suites. So we want that to happen. And the third one is educate. And this would come under that umbrella of educate, just having those hard conversations, talking about racism and microaggressions and the ways that we can be better in hockey, and doing that with your friends and your family and your teammates. If you're a coach, doing it with your players. If you're an executive, doing it around the boardroom, and really having those difficult conversations and getting uncomfortable. So that's what that's about.
Thank you so much. So my next question is for Saroya. So right now I'm trying to learn as much as I can about racism in hockey, and I know it's not the BIPOC players' responsibility to educate me. So I saw on Twitter that you opened up your DMs on Twitter for people to ask questions. And I was wondering what motivated you to do that, and have there been any interesting responses?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I'll say is just that I know that a lot of white people have questions. They have questions about things from hockey to my hair to anything really, that a lot of the time they don't feel comfortable asking. And there hasn't necessarily been a space provided for them to just openly ask questions. And in my sense and with my personality, I think that I have an understanding for both sides. Just my dad's Black and my mom's white. So for me, I know that people have questions. So me deciding to open up my DMs it wasn't a difficult choice, but I understood that I was going to probably receive some pushback and some hatred, which I did. But I think that is often easy to ignore when you have so much positivity being sent your way. So for me, even Gracie, I'm pretty sure you messaged me on Twitter, right? In regards to an essay you were writing. So those are the types of things that I love to see. And I understand that I'm opening my DMs not for myself, because I know that my career is coming to an end, and it will, obviously. So I'm opening up my DMs for the younger Black women below me and that are coming up in the game that want to continue to play. So I think when they have questions, I think it's so important that they're answered, so that they feel comfortable at the rink.
That's awesome. Like, that's inspiring me.
Yeah, and I loved that you were open to reach out to me, and I was able to provide you with that information for your essay. So that obviously made me very happy that you felt open enough to do that. So I appreciate that.
I also saw that you played for Yale, and I'm really interested in that school, obviously, for hockey.
For sure.
Yeah. So I have another question for Erica. So in your first episode of Social Justice in Women's Hockey series, you mentioned that women's hockey is a unique space that different from men's hockey. Why do you think it's a unique space and a good place to have conversation about diversity, inclusivity, and equity in hockey?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gracie, and thank you for asking. And I think, I was taking notes here of the three things that Renee said, because I think it kind of plays into why I think women's hockey is a unique space. So again, being a Black Latina coming into hockey through women's hockey, I didn't necessarily have, and I didn't take ownership of some of the ways that women and BIPOC fans feel, or even players feel about hockey. That was not an experience that I understood because I had never seen it necessarily. And my closest proximity to hockey was in women's hockey. But I mentioned it earlier and I'll say it again. The one thing that I have noticed personally and that I talk to players a lot about is something called microaggressions. And it's something that I experienced as an elite level softball player as well. And it's these things like, and Saroya joked about her hair a little bit ago. It's just things that people say that are a little out of step or that can easily make me, I'll put it on me, can easily make me uncomfortable. And sometimes I think those things are said as jokes, as kind of, people just think it's funny to mention those kinds of things. And other times I think there is a true ignorance. And I mean that in not necessarily an intent to harm, but just that you hear certain things over time and usually people are joking about them. So you think it's okay. And there's an acceptance of certain things. And so while I didn't feel blatant racism or even for myself, bigotry in women's hockey, in the space that I occupy in women's hockey, I have noticed and I've heard of microaggressions. So for me, that seemed like an opportunity where also I witnessed that the women's hockey space was very open to inclusivity when it came to gender expression, and also other ways of identifying on the LGBTQ spectrum. So with those kind of two observations in hand, my theory was that, okay, women's hockey is able to have conversations and to open up thinking and to be thoughtful about how other people identify and want to be identified. So why can't we also do that for race, identity, and ethnicity? And so again, that goes back to me just starting with first players that I knew or players that I knew had spoken about these issues, but then also over time and through the series, really wanting to focus on white players, and asking them questions about how they have conversations with their families and with their teammates about some of what we're seeing, really, especially in the United States, but all through North America and the world, that we're starting to see take center stage. And again, that being things like police brutality or talking about what would be overt racism that happens in ice rinks across the world, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So I have another question for Renee. On the Black Girls Hockey Club website, there is a lot of great information, and you hosted an Instagram live video with Saroya where you talked about how important it is to be doing these things year round. And there are some amazing action items on this page for different audiences. And one of the things that stood out to me as a teammate was putting your body on the line. What I don't understand and would like you to elaborate on is when you say diversity and inclusion are acts of violence if systematic change doesn't happen alongside.
So that's a great question, and I'm excited to elaborate on it. The idea of diversity inclusion means what? That, you know, we're hiring, we're bringing in more people of color, that we're giving them a seat at the table. When it turns into an unsafe environment is when a person of color has a seat at the table and yet they don't have the systemic support within that system, whether it's education, whether it's hockey, you know, whether it's the workplace. Being able to have access to a place doesn't necessarily mean that it's a safe space for that person. In order for it to be a safe space, they need to be able to comfortably and safely speak up, share their opinions, share their points of view without being targeted because of that. And so, you know, that means that whatever that entity is, whether it's, you know, the school that you go to or the place that you work or where you play hockey, the systems have to change. There has to be that education where people are talking about microaggressions and racism and what that looks like in that sport or in that workplace. And that they have a place that they can, a person that they can talk to if something happens, you know, whether it's HR or your coach, they need to be able to speak up without fear of retribution. And oftentimes when, you know, people of color are hired into a company or they're, you know, placed on a team, the goal is for them to, you know, show their faces and mold themselves into that community. And I would say hockey is a really big proponent of that, right? The team player attitude, you know, the individualistic type of personality isn't really accepted or appreciated in hockey as much as maybe we see in other sports. And so it kind of creates an environment where a person of color comes, you know, with a different culture, different background, a different way of doing things, and is expected to kind of fit into the mold. And in hockey, that mold is for, you know, young white men. And if you don't fit into that mold, then you have to pretend that you do in order to get along. And truly, that isn't a safe space for BIPOC folks. You know, I want to come to the hockey rink as my true self. I want to be comfortable. I want to be able to, you know, be proud of my culture and my background and my history and where I'm from. And so that's what that means. I mean, diversity inclusion is great, but it has to come with systemic change. The systems have to shift in order for it to actually work, or else you're not going to be able to retain those people of color. They're going to, go through the system until they're burnt out and they can't handle it anymore, and they step away. And that's not, that's not fruitful for a company. That's not, helpful for the person experiencing it. And ultimately, it's just not good all around. So, if you want to do true diversity and inclusion, there's got to be some systemic change that happens, at a baseline, so that folks of color can come in and really excel.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting. Okay, so Saroya, as you originated Canadian hockey player, do you feel like you have a different perspective on diversity living and playing in the United States, or are the issues kind of the same in both countries?
I would definitely say that they're the same in both countries in terms of hockey. I think that for me, most of my most memorable racist moments in hockey occurred in Canada. So that was me growing up in the game. I think my first instance that I would remember was probably about 13, where I was blatantly called the N-word in the dressing room by my own teammates. So for me, I think that I've never really felt at home at the rink. I mean, I knew I was good at what I did. I knew that I belonged in the sport in some sense, but didn't necessarily connect with my teammates. And that led all the way up until Yale. So even when I was at Yale, there was still, again, the microaggressions that Erica had mentioned, that people don't necessarily realize that go on. And for me, my freshman, sophomore year, I felt like I wasn't able to speak up, and it was just part of the hockey community, and I just had to deal with it. And then eventually my junior, senior year, where I was comfortable bringing it up and talking about it, I was ridiculed for it and told that I had an attitude, or that I wasn't trying to be a team player. Meanwhile, these are things that I've gone through my whole career. So I think in terms of the hockey community, I think that it needs to change as a whole, both in Canada and the US, because the issues are very similar. And we know that a hockey community, everybody, once you're high up in hockey, everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows the names, stuff like that. So I think that as a whole, the whole hockey community needs to change.
Yeah, agreed. Like even you just saying that, like 13, like that makes me sick. That like I've never actually experienced, obviously, but I haven't experienced or like seen anything like that happen. But like that doesn't seem right at all.
Yeah, and I think for me, I never had an ally on my team that was able to back me up and stand up for what I was saying, because nobody else on my team directly understood what I was going through. So it was 4 versus 1, or just in one ear and out the other. Don't let it affect how you play. But that's not how things work when you're totally in love with the sport and you devote 40 hours a week to it. It becomes very difficult and frustrating.
Yeah, well, I admire you for like not listening. Like, you've gotten this far. It's incredible.
Thank you.
So I have like a couple more questions that are just like general, and I just want to hear all your opinions about it. So like when I look at different sports such as basketball, football, and soccer, I see much more diversity, and I'm wondering like what the sort of barrier is there between hockey and these sports. So if you guys have like anything to say about that.
Well, we talked about access, and Erica, her story of not really having access to hockey until she discovered women's hockey, and Blake Bolden being an access point. And in reality, representation matters. And if we don't see someone on the ice that looks like us, or someone behind the bench or in the front office that looks like us, it's it's a deterrent, you know, it's discouraging. We think, well, you know, hockey just isn't meant for me because obviously there's nobody else that looks like me that's playing or that is working in this sport. So I think access is a huge part of it. But also retention, because when things like what happened to Saroya when she was 13, a lot of parents would have taken their kids out and be like, nope, we're not dealing with this. And you aren't able to retain young BIPOC kids because stuff like that happens all the time. And so it takes a strong-willed child and strong-willed parents to have to deal with that, because you know, you talk to any Black hockey player or any hockey player of color, and they will have similar stories, not just starting when, you know, when they started playing professionally, but in at the youth level when they were 13. They, you know, you're going to hear that. I remember talking to Joel Ward, who is now retired, but a very, you know, famous Black hockey player in the NHL, and him saying that his mother had to stop coming to his games when he was young because she couldn't handle hearing what the other parents were saying in the stands about her son on the ice. And, you know, parents of Black and BIPOC hockey players, they have those stories. And so I think, you know, access is really important, but also retention and keeping those kids in there. And it takes an ally, it takes a coach, it takes a mentor, who is willing to step up and stand up for our BIPOC players in order to keep them, you know, in the game, because the love of the game is not the issue. You know, once you're exposed to it and you fall in love with it, that's that. But it's a lot to ask of a BIPOC player or a young Black woman to put up with that, in order to have access and to keep playing the game. It's a lot to ask. And you know, I admire Saroya for being able to work through all of that. But you know, these kids, they shouldn't have to. They really shouldn't. There's got to be a better way of doing it. There's got to be better systems in place in order to protect our kids.
Yeah, agreed. That's a very good response.
Yeah, sorry, Gracie. I just wanted to add, I was listening actually to a podcast that comes from the BBC, and to go back to your question, Gracie, about why things maybe look differently in football and basketball. I'll speak generally and then maybe what I see on the women's side. But the podcast that I was listening to talks about Texas Western and the NCAA tournament, which is really big in the United States, especially for men's basketball. Women's basketball, it's getting up there, but men's basketball, like when people talk about March Madness, that's usually what they're talking about. But it wasn't until 1966 that the first all Black starting players hit the court for the NCAA tournament on the championship game. And Kentucky continues to be a powerhouse, but they faced an all-Black roster of Texas Western, and that became really how the floodgates opened to offer more opportunities for Black basketball players to play elsewhere, and not just at predominantly Black institutions. So the reason I wanted to mention that history is because although what we see now may be different, it's taken work and it's taken places where, to Renee's point, that Black athletes feel comfortable for Black athletes to have opportunity in sport. And I think we see that throughout history. As far as on the women's side, in basketball, we do see that women's basketball. I just finished covering the WNBA this week. We had the finals, and that's an 80% Black woman league. And so we still see that there are opportunities, but I think what's also important, and as Renee touched on, is that it's difficult even in a predominantly Black sport for Black athletes to continue on, because although they might be around people who look like them as far as the pigmentation and the color of their skin, that first off doesn't mean we all have the same experiences. And it certainly doesn't erase how people think of the Black body, and how those who, especially elite athletes, even at the college level and younger now, are subject to racism and some of the microaggressions that we already talked about. So, what it will take for hockey, I think we're starting to see some of that is an acknowledgement that there is a challenge and there's a problem. And I would argue that if we use the NHL as a barometer, that conversation really only opened up, if I wanted to be kind, I'd say maybe in the last 3 or 4 years, as someone from the outside looking in. But the NHL celebrated its 100th anniversary, and I think that was also the first year that it celebrated Black History Month. But Willie O'Ree had broken the color barrier decades before the NHL celebrated Black History Month for the first time, as an example. So there has to be a little bit more of a acknowledgement, and an awareness, and a responsibility that's taken by institutions. And what I mean is, different sports federations, things like the NCAA, the NHL, the NBA, the NFL also has been having its own reckoning. There has to be a responsibility that's taken by these institutions to first believe their players, BIPOC players that are experiencing racism, to then act when they hear of acts of racism or bigotry or microaggressions that are reported, and then to develop systems to eliminate that from the game. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that federations, I'm not sure that leagues, I'm not sure that schools have really consistently done any of those steps.
Yeah, for sure. Saroya, do you have anything to add to that topic?
Honestly, I think they covered the majority of the topics, but again, we talk about access, and I think that goes along with affordability. I think when you look at the other sports, you're taking basketball, football, soccer, you need cleats and a ball, really. And with hockey, you need hundreds of dollars worth of equipment. So I think when we look at hockey specifically, it's making the game more affordable for people of all income levels, people of all different statuses. So I think that affordability is definitely a huge part of that. So again, us Black Girl Hockey Club providing those scholarships are so important for those young Black women entering the game. So I would think that's probably one of the biggest things for me, even just because I know I would consider my family middle class, but I had never had brand new equipment until I had gotten to Yale. And that was huge for me. And I think a lot of other people on my team didn't appreciate that and didn't understand where other people were coming from in that sense. So I think that making the game more affordable is going to be imperative to include all BIPOC and Black players. So
yeah, that's a great response. Thank you. Another question. You guys have an opinion on it. So what do you think needs to happen in order for hockey to become a more inclusive sport, just in general?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think that for me, I think that our white teammates and our white coaches need to make a stronger effort to get to know their players of color. So for me, my junior, senior year at Yale, it made all the difference to me to have a coach that actually sat back, listened, and invited me into his office to talk about why I was upset about a specific comment or why I was frustrated with an area that I think that Yale hockey should have already improved on. And he was open to that criticism. And I think that a lot of those white players need to do the same and make sure that they're educating themselves so that they can be allies, because that makes the game just that much more enjoyable for players of color.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think I'll go off of how I responded to the other question that you asked us, Gracie, and that is that you really have to look at the federations. So USA Hockey, Hockey Canada. You have to look at the institutions or the leagues like the NHL, the NWHL, the PWHPA. And similarly to what Saroya was saying, I'm not sure that I'm willing to accept excuses as to why people are not familiar with that BIPOC people experience racism. I was kind of over it before 2020, but again, I guess if I wanted to give folks the benefit of the doubt, there should be no doubt now. And so we really need to listen to people. And I think I will say this respectfully and thoughtfully, but that also goes for people who identify as BIPOC, because I can induce harm also by, without my knowledge perhaps, exercising my privilege and using terminology or exclusionary terminology, just based on that's what I, again, have access and privilege to do because of how I see the world. You know, and I think that that's important. If we're talking about equity and equality, we really all have to be players in it. And it's not enough just to expect people to respect my point of view and where I come from. I also have to be someone who is listening and learning and actively seeking that, in this case, the sport of hockey, be good for all of us, and not just better for just me. So that's something that I would challenge everyone who's listening, regardless of how they identify, to really embrace, and not just in hockey, but in life.
Yeah, thank you. Renee?
I would just add, that allyship is wonderful, but it's not a one-time thing. It's a lifelong process of not just listening and learning, but performing action as well, because it's one thing to say you're an ally and to quietly comfort your Black friend when something bad happens to them, but Gracie, you mentioned the idea of putting your body on the line. Intrigued you, and that's what I mean. Sometimes you have to stand in between the racism and your BIPOC teammates or your BIPOC friends, in order for things to stop and to protect them. And I think that the idea of being an ally is wonderful, but it's not a one-time deal. It's a lifelong process, and it really involves, we're talking about the Get Uncomfortable campaign, and it really involves getting uncomfortable sometimes, and admitting you're wrong sometimes, and admitting that you didn't know something sometimes, and then listening and learning, and then doing better in the future, and encouraging the people around you to do better. And I think in hockey, it's really easy to, be on an all-white team and to think that those social issues don't affect you, that you can just, stick to sports, as they say, because those social issues aren't present on your team. But you got to understand that, people are watching, people are paying attention, and you're developing a culture on your team and in your little bubble that perhaps can be unpenetrable for BIPOC folks. And so, being an ally more than just walking the walk, but it means learning and changing and doing it for the rest of your life, because the systems that we are a part of, the education system, the criminal justice system, these systems are built on racism, and acknowledging that and learning from that, and then growing and combating that, that's a lifelong thing that we have to do. And BIPOC folks know it, because we have to live our lives from the morning, from the day we're born to the day we die, dealing with these systems. And that's why it's so hard for BIPOC athletes to hear this idea, stick to sports, keep politics out of sports, because our bodies are political, and when we all go and download Saroya's PDF about the Black body, we can understand that a little bit better, that Black bodies are political, just being in an ice hockey rink is an act of resistance for me. So, being an ally is great, but you got to step it up and you got to keep it going. And, one thing that I tell my BIPOC sisters is to practice self-care. And I say that to allies too, because you can't just put Black Lives Matter in your bio on Twitter and then go about your day practicing the same, microaggressions that perhaps you have your entire life. You've got to really buckle down and do the work. And, we talk about educating yourself as an ally, and that's part of it, understanding that you've got to do the readings and you've got to make a concerted effort. It was interesting. Yesterday, I was talking to a president of a nonprofit foundation, and they were asking, what can we do to be less racist, basically? And the answers were real simple, and it was just about articulating them and saying them out loud. And once we were talking about it, she was like, so what you're saying is I have to put in the work. And that's what you got to do. You just got to put in the work as an ally. And it's a constant thing because there's no days off. There's no days off from being Black. There's no days off from being a woman. There's no days off from being LGBTQ. There's no days off from that. And so an ally who those things don't affect can either understand that, empathize, and grow, or they can turn a blind eye, ignore it. And if our hockey institutions continue to turn a blind eye, they're going to eventually, crumble, because we're in 2020. That's not going to fly anymore, as Erica said. It just don't fly.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. Rebecca, would you like to add anything?
No, so I guess that's our conclusion there with Gracie. But I would love for those who've been listening. We've got these three amazing women, and they all are doing fantastic things. We'd love to be able to share where we can find you. So Renee, where can we learn more about you and about the Black Girls Hockey Club?
So you can visit www.blackgirlhockeyclub.org. That's our website. And like I said, we're real active on social media. You can find us on Twitter at Black Girl Hockey or on Instagram. We've been doing some IG lives once in a while at Black Girl Hockey Club, and just join in the conversation.
Wonderful. And take the pledge, right? To get uncomfortable.
Yes. To get uncomfortable pledge is on our website. Front page, you can't miss it.
Yeah, I know Grace, that's how it all started. Gracie told me about it, and she had found you in this, I think in the summer when you were doing your paper. So she has signed up, and we'll all go from there. Erica, where can we find you?
Sure. So you can find me on social media at elindsay08. That's ELINDSAY 08. And the series that Gracie mentioned is called Social Justice. Now it's in women's sports because I've also talked about soccer and basketball, but that's on Sports Talk ELA for Erica Lindsay Ayala.
Wonderful. And I've watched a couple episodes, and they're definitely a must watch. Saroya, where can we find you?
Yeah, so my social media on every platform is at Saroya Tinker 71. On those profiles, you will see my link. It'll take you to my website. It'll take you to my email. And again, my DMs are open. But I also run a mentorship program, so people can check that out on my website with those links. So
amazing. And if anyone wants to get a copy of that paper, they should connect with you and for a long read, I guess. How long are we talking?
I think it's about 60 pages. But yeah, no, it's my senior thesis, so I didn't expect people to want to read it this much, but I did put a lot of work into it. So and I got an A, so it's all good.
Oh, good. An A from Yale too.
Yeah, so
That's an
that's always
accomplishment.
encouraging. But if people want to read it, they can send me an email, and I will email that out to them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, ladies. Um, there's so much that, I mean, I just sat there, I've taken so much in, so much for us to think about too. And I really love what you're saying, Renee, about the fact that it's one thing to talk about it, it's one thing to learn about it, but this is what's really important here at Rise Academy, that there is an actionable piece. So Gracie hasn't completely figured out what that is yet, but as we've been sitting here, I've got the wheels are turning. And hopefully we can connect with you ladies later on as she comes up with her actionable task. So thanks again to all of you for joining us.
Well, yeah, and thank you. And before you leave, I just want to remind Gracie in particular that as someone who's a history buff, there's not much that hasn't been led by women and children in the world. And I just want to thank you for showing interest in what the three of us have brought professionally and personally, but also to encourage you to continue to remain curious, because it's that curiosity and that willingness to see the world differently that has truly always been what has led society to better. So I just want to give some stick taps to you.
Thank you.